In a new campaign video, Democratic presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. called out President Biden for failing to deliver prosperity to Americans, highlighting the average income in the U.S. is $5,000 less than the basic cost of living. Let's watch.
If we're doing so well, then why is it today that 57% of Americans would not put their hands on $1,000 in order to pay for an emergency? And for the first time in American history, most Americans, in fact, 2/3 of us, believe that our children will be worse off than we are today. For most Americans, the American dream has turned into an American nightmare. And whatever graphs and data and statistics that government officials use to try to gaslight us into believing that everything is hunky-dory, reality is written across this country on the plywood that is boarding up all of these closed businesses from Main Street to Union Square in San Francisco, and it's etched on the faces of the mothers and fathers who gather weekly at their kitchen table to go through the bills and try to figure out how in the world they're going to make their ends meet. And that kitchen table math seems a lot more reliable than the sunny economic projections that we're getting from our elected officials of both political parties in the White House.
This video comes on the heels of the first overall inflation increase the United States has experienced in a year. According to data by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the Consumer Price Index rose 3.2% through July, up from 3% in June, with prices rising 0.02% per month due to shelter costs. So the price of rent is going up. I think RFK Jr. makes a really good point in that video, talking about Americans not being able to afford a $1,000 emergency. They absolutely should be able to, when median rent has surpassed 1.7K in the country. And just a year ago, over $2,000, which is extraordinarily high, the highest it's ever been. And that's why I think most people in the polls are saying that their number one issue is jobs and the economy, but really hasn't been a focus of a lot of these presidential races, unless you count Cornel West and Marianne Williamson, which haven't been at the forefront. So I think this ad is a really good choice from the RFK Jr. campaign.
Yeah, he also hit on this idea of the disparate projections of the economy from political leaders versus the average American. He called it sunny economic projections, and he's exactly right. I mean, the Biden administration is celebrating Bidenomics as a success in bringing down inflation. We had the Deputy Treasury Secretary tweeting in response to this news about inflation growing 3.2%. Last summer, headline inflation was over 9%. Now it's down significantly to just over 3%. POTUS and this administration will keep working to bring down costs, maintain a robust labor market, expand supply, and invest in America. But the reality is that just because the rate of inflation has decreased over the past year doesn't mean that prices are not still high, right? It doesn't mean that prices have decreased. Just means inflation is growing at a slower rate. So Americans are not going to the grocery store and actually seeing their groceries become more affordable. They're just a little bit less unaffordable. And so there seems to be this attempt to really cover up the reality of the economic situation for Americans. And I think it's really distasteful on behalf of the people in power to pretend that their economic concerns aren't real.
Yeah, I think the false trade-off that is portrayed by so many administrations, we had the same Fed chair under Donald Trump as we do with Joe Biden. So expecting a vastly different policy coming out of the Treasury and Fed, I think is a pipe dream for a lot of people. Joe Biden's Fed is just doing more of the same. This trade-off that they say that we have between price stability and full employment is not really there like they say it is. So many economists have said that the Phillips curve is outdated. Jerome Powell said himself 3 years ago that the approach that they're taking of raising interest rates to mitigate inflation is just not as strong of a relationship as it once was, if it's there at all. And so the idea that some kind of Bidenomics has led to job growth is insane, when the explicit purpose of your Fed is to increase unemployment, to somehow mitigate this very supply side concentrated inflation. They've done little to nothing about the supply concerns that became a huge problem at the beginning of COVID that led to runaway inflation. Then we saw a period of record profits. You can't tell the average American that things are going really well economically in this country and we've seen job growth when those job numbers are mostly recovery from the pandemic and not capturing the millions of Americans that have stopped looking for jobs. They only capture Americans that have been looking for jobs in the past 4 weeks. What about those that have not been able to find a job that will pay their bills and cover that median rent and they've given up? So it's not a full economic picture. And just calling that out, even without providing a clear policy solution or saying what he would do differently in his administration, is actually enough in the current political climate because no one else is even doing that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, on the job growth question, we've also seen a lot of people taking on second and third jobs because they can't afford to get by with just one. And so that's been accounting for a large part of the job growth that we've been seeing as well. And Biden himself is running away from the name of the Inflation Reduction Act at a fundraiser earlier this week. He said that he wished he hadn't called it that because it's not really about reducing inflation, which I think everybody who actually read the bill could have said when it was being considered. But there was this amazing bait and switch that was pulled on behalf of the Biden administration. And meanwhile, over on the 2024 campaign trail, liberals on social media are outraged over actor Woody Harrelson's apparent support of RFK Jr. Users unleashed over a photo that the actor posted with Cheryl Hines, RFK Jr.'s wife. One wrote, "We lost Woody." Another said, "Good God Almighty, Woody Harrelson, what in the hell happened to you? RFK Jr., really?" So I guess the gatekeeping continues, Jessica.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting response we've seen to RFK Jr. There's been a media circus to slander him, which most of the time is the media taking what he said out of context. And when he clarifies what he said and says, that's not at all what I meant, and those words are kind of vague anyway. So to take them and assume the worst possible interpretation is just a deliberate effort to slander another anti-establishment candidate. That's how I take it. There are some substantive criticisms you can make of JFK Jr., but to say things like we lost him just because he's wearing a Kennedy 2024 hat is a weird kind of political discourse where people are just so easily dismissive of someone else's political camp without giving substantive reasons as to why. I think it's dangerous when it comes to things like the Iowa caucus, where people talk together about who they're going to caucus for. And when you have this kind of gatekeeping, it's just not healthy for our political process. And it could really affect the votes in the first states for the Democratic primary in New Hampshire and in Iowa.
There seems to be this just bizarre attitude circulating around American political discourse that there's only one right way to think, and anyone who disagrees with you is not just wrong, but also bad and potentially evil. And it's really amazing to see that happen in regards to RFK Jr. because there's so much that he's right about, just objectively right. I mean, in terms of what he's been talking about in regards to the pandemic, right, favoring early therapeutics over vaccine mandates. We've now seen the FDA arguing in a court case just this week that they should allow doctors to prescribe ivermectin in response to COVID-19, even though they were tweeting just a year or two ago that everyone should stay away from ivermectin because it's for horses and dogs. So all of the public health bureaucrats completely clown themselves throughout the entire pandemic. And then they're somehow shocked, the establishment, at the rise of people like RFK Jr., who are willing to speak unabashed truth about the reality of what people have been through.
Yeah, I think it's a temporary form of support or rejection of a candidate when it's over these rumors, right? When you have a candidate who's actually going to look at data and support people who look at data and who look at research, they're going to support things that originally people have rejected. If the data turns out to support that ivermectin has been useful in treating patients, there have been doctors that have reported that it's been extremely useful in rashes that come after people have the vaccine. Is it useful for treating that kind of antihistamine response that has been stubborn to other drugs that are supposed to treat that? If the research and data shows that it is, and doctors are saying it shows that it is, and we should pursue research so that we have the data to either confirm nor deny that, you should support that if you support science. And so I think the quick dismissals of ivermectin, just because initially it was something that was promoted by Joe Rogan and there was a particular community of people that were taking it kind of experimentally, okay, fine. You can say at that point in time, I wouldn't be taking this drug that's usually used for horses and dogs to treat parasites. But then, if some people tried it and it ends up working, if you support science, you would support them doing research to either confirm or deny this with a statistically significant sample. That is how research and science works. But to dismiss it because its initial genesis was in the Joe Rogan community and you don't like them, it's not really supporting the science there. And so I think RFK Jr. takes this kind of independent thinking approach to a lot of the political issues that a lot of people aren't used to because we have so many candidates that just so blindly follow a policy platform. So I think it's good we have a candidate that strangely says he really supports free market economics, but then is very critical of the conditions that the market in the United States produced, which is extreme wealth inequality. We have CEO pay at 398.8 times the average worker at a company. That was at 20 times the average worker at a company just in 1965. We've had wage stagnation since around the 70s. There are a lot of problems in the United States that I think could be addressed by regulation. I'm not sure what he sees his role as president to address a lot of the economic issues he outlines in that video. But I think a lot of people are all ears given how he's approached other issues before, and it's good he's at least talking about these things.
Yeah, exactly. There's so much elitism in response to people who are trying to, as you said, think independently about what's facing them, the challenges that are coming up in America, and the establishment is so intent on just keeping control of all of the discourse in our country. I mean, I heard Jonah Goldberg on CNN this week talking about how small donors are actually not democratic because large donors, wealthy donors, have a better idea of how to spend money and are more strategic. And it's like backwards land to hear someone say something so obviously detached from reality. We'll be back with more Rising after this.